The cathedral was dead silent. 200 of New York's most dangerous elites stared in pure shock as the ruthless boss of the Russo syndicate grabbed his bride, the 250-pound outcast her own family hid away, and delivered a possessive, breathtaking kiss that proved this was no arranged joke. In the opulent, suffocating world of the Hastings family, appearance wasn't just everything, it was the only thing. Arthur Hastings ran a mid-level crime syndicate masquerading as a high-end real estate and hospitality emperor in Long Island, but his wife, Beatrice, ran the family image. And in Beatrice's eyes, her eldest daughter, Penelope, was an unforgivable stain on that image. Penelope, or Penny, to the few staff members who dared speak to her with any warmth, was 24 years old and weighed 250 pounds. In a family of razor-thin socialites and sharp-jawed mobsters, Penny's soft, plush curves and round face made her a target for relentless cruelty. She wasn't just ignored. She was actively hidden. When the Hastings hosted their lavish galas to schmooze corrupt politicians and rival bosses, Penny was banished to the back offices or the sprawling industrial kitchens. Her younger sister, Chloe, was the golden child. 22, blonde, with a waist you could wrap 2 hands around, Chloe was the weapon Arthur planned to use to secure a powerful alliance. Chloe was vicious, a beautiful viper who loved nothing more than reminding Penny of her place. "You're sweating, Penelope." Beatrice's voice cut through the steam of the kitchen like a frozen blade. Penny looked up from the massive ledger she was auditing. While her family treated her like a maid, she was the secret backbone of their legitimate fronts. She was a savant with numbers, catching money-laundering discrepancies that their highly paid accountants missed. "It's 90 degrees in here, Mother," Penny said quietly, adjusting the thick, dark-rimmed glasses that framed her hazel eyes. She tugged at her oversized black sweater, a garment she wore even in summer to hide her arms. "Don't talk back to me," Beatrice snapped, her immaculate, manicured finger pointing sharply. "The Russo family is arriving in exactly 1 hour. Daniel Russo himself is coming to collect on your father's debts. If this dinner isn't perfect, we are ruined. And I swear to God, Penelope, if you wander out of this kitchen and let him see you looking like a stuffed sausage in that horrendous sweater, I will lock you in the basement until Christmas." Penny swallowed the familiar lump of humiliation in her throat. "I have no intention of leaving the kitchen. I have the quarterly reports to finish." "Good. Stay out of sight. Chloe is wearing the vintage Dior. She's going to charm Mr. Russo. He needs a wife, and an alliance with us is his best foothold in Long Island. If Chloe pulls this off, our debts are erased." Beatrice looked Penny up and down with raw disgust. "Try not to eat the hors d'oeuvres. We need them for the actual guests." As the kitchen doors swung shut, Penny let out a shaky breath, wiping a tear from her cheek. She was used to it, but the sting never entirely faded. She turned back to her ledger, burying her pain in the cold, hard logic of numbers. An hour later, the atmosphere in the Hastings estate shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with the undeniable presence of power. Daniel Russo had arrived. At 32, Daniel was a terrifying figure. He was the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate, having taken over after his father's violent death. He was known for his icy demeanor, his ruthless efficiency, and his absolute lack of mercy. He was tall, built like a heavyweight fighter under his bespoke Italian suits, with eyes as dark and impenetrable as obsidian. The dinner was proceeding in the grand dining room. Penny could hear the muffled sounds of clinking crystal and Chloe's high-pitched, rehearsed laughter echoing down the hallway. Penny sat at the stainless steel prep table, eating a modest plate of leftover pasta, lost in a complex tax loophole she was documenting. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the kitchen pushed open. Penny didn't look up, assuming it was one of the busboys. "I need ice," a deep, gravelly voice demanded. Penny froze. The voice didn't belong to the staff. She slowly lifted her head. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and shadow. Daniel Russo. He had shed his suit jacket, his crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a sliver of a dark tattoo on his chest. He stopped dead when he saw her. Penny's heart hammered against her ribs. She instinctively crossed her arms over her stomach, shrinking into her chair. The ice machine is by the pantry," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. Daniel didn't move toward the machine. His dark eyes locked onto her. He took in her messy bun, her flushed cheeks, the thick sweater, and the ledger sitting open next to her half-eaten plate of pasta. He didn't look at her with the disgust her mother did. He looked at her with intense, terrifying calculation. He walked slowly toward her table. Penny held her breath, terrified. He stopped right beside her, leaning down slightly to look at the ledger. "You're the one doing the books," he stated. It wasn't a question. Penny blinked. "Excuse me. Your father's official accountant is an idiot named Vincent. But I saw the revised books he sent over last week. The corrections, the routing numbers, it was the work of someone much taughter. Someone with a heavy hand in forensic accounting." Daniel's gaze shifted from the paper to her face. "It was you." I just help out," Penny whispered, shrinking back from his overwhelming proximity. He smelled of expensive cedar, expensive whiskey, and danger. Daniel's eyes drifted downward, taking in her soft, full figure. Unlike the men in her family who looked away from her in embarrassment, Daniel stared. His gaze was heavy, lingering on the curve of her hips, hidden beneath the oversized fabric, moving up to the fullness of her breasts, and finally resting on her lips. A strange, dark heat flickered in his eyes. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Penelope," she breathed. Before he could say another word, the kitchen doors burst open. Beatrice rushed in, her face pale. "Mr. Russo, we were wondering where—" She stopped, her eyes widening in sheer horror as she saw Daniel standing inches from her overweight, hidden daughter. "I apologize, Mr. Russo," Beatrice shrieked, rushing forward. "The staff was supposed to keep the kitchen clear. Please, come back to the dining room. Chloe was just telling a story about her time in Paris." Daniel didn't break eye contact with Penny for a long, agonizing second. Finally, he straightened up. "Right," he said coldly. He turned his back on Beatrice and walked out of the kitchen. Beatrice turned on Penny, her face twisted in absolute fury. "What did you do?" she hissed. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing. He just asked for ice," Penny cried. "If you have ruined this for your sister, Penelope, I will make you wish you were never born." Beatrice spun on her heel and chased after the Mafia boss. Penny sat alone in the quiet kitchen, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She didn't know what had just happened, but the way Daniel Russo had looked at her, like she was a puzzle he suddenly wanted to solve, like she was something he actually saw, sent a terrifying thrill straight to her core. The tension in the Hastings drawing room the next evening was thick enough to choke on. Arthur Hastings sat sweating in his leather armchair. Beatrice stood rigidly by the fireplace, while Chloe lounged on a velvet sofa, wearing a skin-tight red dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was twirling a lock of blonde hair, looking smug. Penny was not in the room. She had been strictly ordered to stay in her bedroom on the second floor. But the old Victorian house had thin vents, and Penny was crouched by the floorboard in her room, listening to the meeting below. Daniel Russo had returned, bringing his brutal underboss, Matteo, with him. The time for pleasantries was over. The Hastings owed the Russo family $5 million in stolen shipments, and Daniel was here to collect his pound of flesh. "The money is gone, Daniel." Arthur's voice trembled through the vent. "My men were intercepted, but we have territory. We have the docks in Montauk, and we have a proposition." "I don't need your docks, Arthur." Daniel's voice was smooth, bored, and lethal. "I already control the unions. What I need is absolute loyalty from your sector. I need blood ties to ensure you don't cross me again." Beatrice stepped in, her voice dripping with honey. "Which is exactly why we are offering a union, Mr. Russo. Our families joined in marriage. My daughter, Chloe. She is young, beautiful, and completely devoted to our family's legacy. She would make an exquisite Mafia wife." Chloe giggled softly. "I've always admired you, Daniel." Silence stretched in the room below. Penny pressed her ear closer to the grate, her heart breaking just a little. Of course, it was always Chloe. Chloe gets the billionaire mob boss. Penny gets locked in her room. "A marriage," Daniel finally said, the word rolling off his tongue like a threat. "Yes, that suits my needs. A legal bind to your assets and a hostage in my bed. It's perfect." Beatrice let out an audible sigh of relief. "Oh, wonderful. We can announce the engagement this weekend." "But," Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a gunshot, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. I don't want the blonde." Penny gasped silently upstairs. "I beg your pardon?" Arthur stammered. "I don't want Chloe," Daniel said flatly. "She's a liability. Vain, loud, and she talks to federal agents at country club mixers. You think my men don't watch you?" Chloe let out an indignant, outraged gasp. "How dare you!" "Quiet!" Daniel snapped, his tone so terrifying it silenced the room instantly. "I am forgiving a $5 million debt. In exchange, I take your daughter. But I take the one who actually has brains, the one who fixed your cooked books. I want Penelope." Upstairs, Penny fell backward onto her rug, her hands flying to her mouth. The world spun. "He wants me." Downstairs, absolute chaos erupted. "Penelope!" Beatrice shrieked, all pretense of high society vanishing. "You must be joking. Mr. Russo, she is what, Beatrice?" Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "She's an embarrassment," Chloe screamed. "She's a fat pig. You can't possibly want her over me." There was the sound of a heavy thud, Matteo slamming a hand on a table. "Watch your mouth when you speak to the boss," Matteo warned. "Listen to me very carefully," Daniel said, and the deadly calm in his voice made Penny shiver from a floor away. "I am marrying Penelope. We wed in exactly 3 weeks. She will come to live at my estate in Manhattan. If you try to hide her, if you mistreat her between now and the altar, or if you attempt to substitute this brainless blonde at the ceremony, I will burn this house to the ground with all of you inside it. Do we have a deal, Arthur?" Yes," Arthur whimpered. "Yes, Mr. Russo. Penelope is yours." The heavy front door slammed shut a minute later. Immediately, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Penny barely had time to scramble away from the vent before her bedroom door was thrown open. Beatrice stood there, her face red with rage, chest heaving. Behind her, Chloe was crying tears of pure, venomous jealousy. "You planned this!" Chloe screamed, lunging into the room. "You disgusting, manipulative cow! What did you do to him?" "Nothing," Penny cried, backing into her dresser. "I swear I didn't do anything." Beatrice grabbed Penny by the arm, her nails digging into Penny's soft flesh. "I don't know what kind of sick joke he is playing, Penelope. Maybe he thinks marrying a grotesque beast will humiliate your father. But you are going to go through with this, and you are going to make sure he forgives our debt. But don't you dare for 1 second think he actually desires you." Beatrice sneered, her eyes raking over Penny's body. "Look at you. Men like Daniel Russo do not want women like you. You are a transaction, a joke." The next 3 weeks were a psychological torture chamber. Beatrice and Chloe subjected Penny to every cruelty imaginable. They forced her into a severe liquid diet, mocking her when the scale didn't drop miraculously fast. But the worst came during the wedding dress fitting. Beatrice had hired a high-end bridal designer who clearly shared her disgust for larger bodies. In the mirrored fitting room, Penny stood in her underwear, trying to cover herself while the designer, a severe woman named Madame Vane, clicked her tongue. "It takes so much fabric," Madame Vane sighed, pulling a measuring tape tight enough to leave red marks on Penny's waist. "I can try to create an optical illusion with dark lace panels on the sides to shave off some of this bulk. But there are limits to miracles." Chloe, sitting on a plush sofa sipping champagne, laughed cruelly. "Just wrap her in a bedsheet and tie it with a rope. It's not like the groom is going to actually look at her." Tears pricked Penny's eyes. She stared at her own reflection, her round stomach, her thick thighs, the stretch marks she had hated her entire life. She felt utterly worthless, a pawn, a joke. Suddenly the boutique doors chimed, and heavy boots echoed on the hardwood floor. "Get out!" The deep, commanding voice made everyone freeze. Daniel Russo stood in the doorway of the fitting room, his dark eyes blazing with an anger so intense it sucked the oxygen from the room. His underboss, Matteo, stood behind him, blocking the exit. "Mr. Russo!" Beatrice gasped, scrambling to her feet. "It is bad luck to see the bride before the—" "I said get out!" Daniel repeated, stepping into the room. He pointed at Madame Vane. "You, drop the tape." He looked at Chloe and Beatrice. "Both of you, leave, now." Terrified by the sheer violence radiating from him, Beatrice, Chloe, and the designer scurried out of the fitting room. Matteo shut the heavy doors, leaving Penny entirely alone with the Mafia boss. Penny was hyperventilating, desperately trying to cover her body with her arms, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Please," she sobbed, closing her eyes. "Please don't look at me." Daniel took off his suit jacket. He walked over to her slowly, his footsteps echoing. He draped the warm, heavy, expensive fabric of his jacket over her shoulders, pulling it gently closed over her chest. Penny opened her eyes, startled by the gentle gesture. She looked up into his face. He wasn't looking at her with disgust. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark with a protective fury. "They have been starving you," he said softly, reaching out to trace the dark circles under her eyes with his thumb. "They just want me to look acceptable," Penny whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. "I know I'm not what you want. I know I'm just a contract, Daniel. My mother said you're doing this to mock my father. You don't have to pretend." Daniel's eyes flared. He stepped closer, his large hands gripping her shoulders, pulling her flush against his solid chest. "Your mother is a stupid woman," he growled. "I don't play games with my name, Penelope, and I don't marry for a joke. I chose you because I wanted you, exactly as you are. If you ever let those vultures make you feel ashamed of this body again, I will cut out their tongues. Do you understand me?" Penny's breath hitched. She stared into his eyes, looking for the lie. There was none. Only a terrifying, possessive honesty. For the first time in her 24 years of life, Penelope Hastings felt something she had never experienced. She felt wanted. "I have brought my own tailor," Daniel said, stepping back slightly but keeping one hand on her waist. "He is waiting outside. He is going to make you a dress that highlights every single curve on your body. You are going to be a queen, Penelope. My queen. And the entire city is going to bow to you." The day of the wedding arrived with a fierce thunderstorm. Inside the Basilica of St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, 200 of New York's most dangerous elites crowded the pews. The atmosphere was toxic with anticipation. The Hastings associates whispered maliciously to the Russo soldiers, fully expecting a walking disaster, a bloated joke stuffed into white tulle. But in the vestibule, Penelope stared at her reflection in awe. Daniel's brilliant Italian tailor hadn't tried to hide her body. He had framed it. Her gown was a masterpiece of heavy ivory silk and intricate Venetian lace. An off-the-shoulder neckline displayed her collarbones, while the corset-laced bodice cinched her waist tightly before flaring perfectly over her wide hips. With her dark hair woven with small diamonds, she didn't look like an outcast. She looked like a breathtaking queen. Arthur Hastings offered his arm, refusing to meet her eyes. As the heavy wooden doors groaned open and the pipe organ swelled, Penny stepped into the aisle. Instantly, the malicious whispers died. A collective stunned silence fell over the cathedral. Heads craned, eyes widening not in mockery, but in genuine, unadulterated shock. She carried herself with a terrified but undeniable dignity. At the altar, Daniel Russo stood rigid in a stark black tuxedo. The moment he saw her, the cold, ruthless Mafia boss completely shifted. His chest heaved. His dark eyes devoured every curve, every inch of lace, looking at her as if she were the only oxygen in the room. When Arthur tried to formally hand her over, Daniel ignored the older man entirely. He stepped down, gripping Penny's trembling hand in his warm, calloused one. "You look exquisite," he murmured, his thumb stroking her knuckles. The traditional Catholic Mass passed in a tense blur. In the front row, Beatrice wore dark charcoal, practically mourning, while Chloe glared with bitter resentment. They were simply waiting for the punchline. "Do you, Daniel, take Penelope to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest asked. "I do," Daniel's voice echoed, absolute and unwavering. Penny looked up at this dangerous killer, seeing the one thing she had craved her entire life: absolute protection. "I do," she whispered. "You may kiss the bride." Beatrice leaned forward, a smug smirk forming. This was it. The moment Daniel would give her overweight daughter a polite, disgusted peck to seal the contract, humiliating her in front of the world. Instead, Daniel turned fully toward Penny. His large hands slid into her dark hair, gripping the back of her head. He pulled her flush against his hard body, bent her backward, and crashed his mouth down onto hers. It was a consuming, ravenous kiss. His tongue swept into her mouth, his arm wrapping tight around her thick waist to claim her. Penny gasped, instinctively gripping his lapels, kissing him back with a desperate fire. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Someone dropped a hymnal. Beatrice turned the color of ash, her smug smirk shattering. Chloe let out a strangled cry of disbelief. This was no business transaction. The boss of the Russo syndicate was absolutely obsessed with the fat girl. When they finally parted, Penny's cheeks were beautifully flushed. Daniel turned to the crowd, keeping her tucked firmly against his side. His triumphant smile vanished into terrifying malice as he locked eyes with the front row. "We are skipping the reception line," Daniel announced effortlessly over the shocked silence. "But first we must settle the Hastings debt, Mateo." The brutal underboss stepped forward, tossing a thick manila folder onto the marble floor. Photos and bank statements spilled at Arthur and Beatrice's feet. "That," Daniel declared, his voice like a judge delivering a death sentence, "is proof that the $5 million stolen from my shipments wasn't taken by a rival gang. It was embezzled by your wife, Arthur, and your lovely daughter, Chloe." Chaos erupted in the cathedral. "You used fake accounts, thought you could offer me your skinny, useless daughter as a peace offering and walk away rich," Daniel sneered as his soldiers simultaneously stood up, blocking the exits. "It's a lie!" Chloe shrieked, backing away. Daniel looked down at Penny, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second before hardening back to obsidian. "My wife is no longer a Hastings," he bellowed, his voice vibrating with lethal authority. "She is a Russo. She is untouchable. And as for the rest of you," he glanced at Mateo, "take them to the basement." As the panicked screams began, Daniel wrapped his suit jacket over Penny's shoulders, scooped her effortlessly into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, and carried his bride out into the storm. The ride from the cathedral in Little Italy to Daniel's sprawling 3-story penthouse in Tribeca was a blur of adrenaline and rain. Penny sat in the back of the armored Maybach, shivering despite the heavy tuxedo jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on her. Her parents and sister were in the hands of the Mafia, and she was entirely alone with the most dangerous man in New York. Daniel poured 2 glasses of neat scotch from the car's crystal decanter and handed her one. "Drink," he commanded softly. "It will settle your nerves." Penny took a sip, the amber liquid burning a fiery trail down her throat. "What are you going to do to them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Embezzlement is punishable by death in our world, Penelope. Your mother and sister used fake Delaware LLCs to route my money through Cayman National Bank. They thought they were financial masterminds. They were sloppy." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense in the shadows of the car. "But they are your blood, so their fate belongs to you." Penny blinked, stunned. "Me?" "You are my wife. You wear my ring, and you bear my name. In my house, you have absolute power." Daniel reached out, his thumb gently tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "Tomorrow, you will decide what happens to the Hastings legacy. Tonight, you just breathe." When they arrived at the penthouse, Penny expected a gilded cage. She expected to be pointed to a separate guest room, a business transaction completed. Instead, Daniel led her to the master suite, a massive glass-walled room overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. "The bathroom is through there," Daniel said, unbuttoning his cuffs. "Take your time. I'll have food sent up." An hour later, Penny emerged from the marble shower. She had found a silk robe in the closet. It was one of Daniel's, deep black and vast, but it wrapped comfortably around her 250-pound frame, the soft material clinging to her lush hips and thick thighs. She felt vulnerable, stripped of her oversized sweaters and protective layers. She walked into the bedroom to find a feast laid out on the glass table: truffle risotto, roasted duck, and warm artisan bread, things she hadn't been allowed to eat in years. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the massive king-sized bed, wearing only a pair of dark sweatpants. His chest was covered in intricate dark tattoos, scars of a violent life mingling with ink. When he looked up and saw her, the hunger in his eyes was visceral. It wasn't the polite tolerance her mother had promised. It was raw, undeniable desire. "Sit," he urged, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Eat, Penelope. You've been starving for 3 weeks." As she took her first bite, a tear slipped down her cheek. The rich, savory taste of the food, combined with the sheer exhaustion of her trauma, broke the dam. She began to cry, silently at first, and then with quiet, heaving sobs. Daniel was out of his seat in an instant. He knelt beside her chair, his large, calloused hands wiping away her tears. "Hey," he murmured, his voice incredibly gentle. For a man who ordered executions before breakfast. "Who told you that you weren't allowed to take up space in this world?" "My whole life," Penny sobbed, looking down at her stomach. "I've been told I'm disgusting, that no one could ever want me unless they were forced." Daniel's expression darkened with a terrifying, protective rage. He stood up, took her hands, and pulled her gently to her feet. He backed her slowly against the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights painting her skin in gold and shadows. "Look at me," he commanded. When she met his gaze, he pressed his body against hers. He made sure she felt exactly how much he wanted her. "Your mother is a hollow, bitter woman who worships bones. I worship this." His large hands spanned her wide waist, sliding down to grip her heavy, plush thighs. "You are soft, Penelope. You are brilliant. You are exactly what I crave. And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." He kissed her then, slow, deep, and worshipful. For the first time, Penny didn't try to suck in her stomach or hide her arms. She melted into the kiss, her hands tangling in his dark hair, finally feeling the terrifying, beautiful weight of being truly loved. The next morning, Daniel took her to a secure warehouse in Red Hook. Inside, Arthur, Beatrice, and Chloe were tied to metal chairs, looking bruised and absolutely terrified. When the heavy steel doors opened and Penny walked in, flanked by Daniel and Matteo, the room fell dead silent. Penny wore a tailored crimson power suit that Daniel's team had procured for her overnight. It hugged her curves like armor. She no longer looked down. She stood tall, a queen surveying her prisoners. "Penelope, please!" Beatrice shrieked, struggling against the zip ties. "Tell him to let us go. We're your family." "You're a monster," Chloe spat, her blonde hair matted and her designer dress ruined. "You stole my life." Penny walked slowly toward her sister. She looked at the beautiful, cruel girl who had tormented her for 24 years. Then she looked at the ledger sitting on the metal table beside them. "I didn't steal anything, Chloe," Penny said, her voice icy and calm. "You dug your own grave. I just refused to fall into it with you." Penny turned to Daniel. "I don't want their blood on my hands, but I don't want them to have anything either." Daniel nodded smoothly. "Done." Penny looked back at her parents. "Arthur, Beatrice, you are being stripped of the Oyster Bay estate. Your accounts at J.P. Morgan and Chase are frozen and seized by the Russo Syndicate. You are going to take the $2,000 in cash Matteo is about to hand you, and you are going to get on a bus to Ohio. If you ever set foot in New York again, or if you ever say my name out loud, Daniel will end you." Arthur wept openly. Beatrice stared in absolute, horrified disbelief. "You can't do this to us," Beatrice whispered. "We are high society." "Not anymore," Penny replied coldly. "Now you're invisible. Enjoy it. I did for 24 years. 6 months later, the New York underworld had shifted dramatically. The Russo Syndicate had never been more profitable, and everyone knew exactly why. Daniel Russo was the muscle, the fear, and the executioner. But Penelope Russo was the brain. Operating from the penthouse, Penny had completely restructured the syndicate's legitimate fronts. She absorbed the Hastings real estate empire, liquidating their toxic assets and laundering Daniel's casino money through high-end commercial properties in Hudson Yards. She was a financial phantom, a genius who saw numbers in 3 dimensions, and she had never been happier. She had blossomed. The heavy sweaters were gone, replaced by custom-made silk dresses that flaunted her thick hourglass figure. Daniel treated her like a goddess, heavily guarding her, but never restricting her. However, peace in the Mafia is always temporary. Trouble arrived in the form of Viktor Sokolov, a brutal bratva-boss from Brighton Beach who believed Daniel had gone soft by marrying a fat, useless liability. Viktor requested a sit-down at an exclusive, heavily guarded back room at Cipriani Wall Street to renegotiate a shipping port contract. Daniel arrived with Matteo and a dozen heavily armed men. But he also brought Penny. Victor, a massive man with a scarred face, laughed out loud when Penny walked in, her heels clicking confidently on the marble. "Daniel, my friend, you bring the wife to a business meeting? What, did you need someone to test the food for poison?" The Bratva soldiers chuckled. Daniel's hand instantly went to the gun at his waistband, his eyes flashing with lethal intent. But Penny placed a gentle, manicured hand on her husband's chest, silently stopping him. She smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that she had learned from Daniel himself. She took a seat at the heavy mahogany table directly across from Victor. Matteo placed a thick black binder in front of her. "I'm not here to taste the food, Mr. Sokolov," Penny said smoothly, flipping the binder open. "I'm here to audit your life." Victor stopped laughing. "Excuse me." Penny adjusted her designer glasses. 3 weeks ago, you threatened to seize the Russo shipping containers at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, claiming we owed you a tariff. But I've been looking into your accounts, specifically the offshore shell companies you hold with the Bank of Cyprus, the ones your own Bratva bosses back in Moscow don't know about. Victor's face drained of color. "How did you... You've been skimming off the top of your own Brotherhood's gun-running profits for 3 years, Victor," Penny continued, her voice echoing in the dead, silent room. She slid a stack of banking transcripts across the table. $5 million, hidden in a trust under your mistress's maiden name. If I hit one button on this iPad, these documents go directly to your superiors in Russia. You won't make it to JFK Airport before they put a bullet in your head." The Russian mobster sat entirely paralyzed. His men exchanged nervous, terrified glances. Daniel leaned over Penny's chair, his hands resting possessively on her shoulders. He looked at Victor with a wicked, triumphant grin. "You were saying something about my wife being a liability, Victor." "What do you want?" Victor choked out, sweating profusely. "We keep the Brooklyn ports," Penny said cleanly. "You waive the tariff, and you pay the Russo family a 20% tax on all your future shipments for the inconvenience of this meeting. Or I send the email." Victor swallowed hard, looking at the fat girl he had completely underestimated. She held his entire life in her soft, manicured hands. "Deal," he whispered. As they walked out of Cipriani's, the crisp autumn air hitting their faces, Daniel pulled Penny into a dark alcove. He pressed her against the stone wall of the building, his hands gripping her thick hips. "You," he growled, kissing her neck fiercely, "are the most terrifying, magnificent creature God ever put on this earth. I have never been more turned on in my life." Penny giggled, breathless as his lips trailed up to her jaw. "I told you I was good with numbers." Daniel pulled back slightly, looking into her hazel eyes. "You know, I've been thinking about something for the last 6 months. Your mother and sister. They were sloppy, but the financial trail they left was almost too obvious, like someone purposely moved the firewall so my men would find the embezzlement. Penny's smile widened, a mischievous glint in her eye. Daniel's breath hitched as realization dawned on him. It was you. You hacked their accounts. You left the breadcrumbs for my accountant to find. My family locked me in a kitchen for 24 years, Daniel, Penny whispered, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. I knew what you were. I knew what you did to people who stole from you. I just needed a way out. I needed a monster of my own to burn their house down. Daniel stared at her in absolute awe. She hadn't been a victim waiting to be saved. She had been the spider spinning the web. She had chosen him. You brilliant, beautiful witch, he murmured, his voice thick with adoration and dark promise. He kissed her again, completely oblivious to the heavily armed guards waiting for them. Penelope Russo wasn't the fat, invisible daughter anymore. She was the undisputed queen of the New York underworld, and heaven help anyone who ever told her to hide again. Did Penny's ultimate revenge leave you speechless? From the hidden daughter to the absolute queen of the Mafia underworld, Penelope proved that true power and beauty have nothing to do with a dress size. If you loved seeing this brilliant, curvy mastermind outsmart her toxic family and a Russian mob boss to claim her crown, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a fierce heroine, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping romance dramas.